But our guest that's up now is Kevin C. Neece. Kevin is the author of The Gospel According to Star Trek and a speaker on media, the arts, pop culture from a Christian worldview perspective. He's a contributing editor for Imaginatio et. I'm going to have him pronounce that for us. I'm sorry. I've got a cold setting in, and my eyes are blurred a little bit. A journal of theology and the arts, in his work has appeared in the book Light Shining in a Dark Place, Discovering Theology through film, New Identity magazine, among many, many others. He most recently edited and contributed to Spockology, a collection of essays on Spock and Leonard Nimoy. A former professor, Kevin holds a BAS in Communications and Philosophy and an MLA in Fine Arts. He lives with his wife and son in the Fort Worth, Texas area. Without any further delay, let's get him on the line. Kevin, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show, my friend.
Hey, Pat, it's good to talk to you. How are you, sir?
Got a cold coming on for some reason that just started popping up this afternoon. I hate being sick, but hey, I figure one or two a year is just something we got to live with.
Right.
Before we get started, of course, I just scratched the surface with a little bit of your bio. Why don't you let our listeners know a little bit about you, kind of how you got into what you do. I want to talk about what you do, your perspective on things. You've got a lot of stuff. Your book. You're also the founder of the Undiscovered Country Project. Would like to talk about that. But how did you get into this? How did you get into this whole thing?
Well, I've been interested in film and media and pop culture, my whole life. Actually set out to become a career filmmaker when I was a kid. I still work in video production, so, I'm not far off it. But I was a Star Trek fan for a lot of years, and then I kind of fell away from it for a while when the television schedule got crowded, as my life was getting crowded, and stayed away for a long time, and in the interim had what I call a worldview conversion. I had a great philosophy professor by the name of Dr. David Noggle, and I went in his class, and after the first day, immediately changed my major, and it really showed me a new way of looking at the world, and helped me develop my own Christian worldview, and helped me to engage the world that I live in and the world that I interact with in new and exciting ways. And so when I got back to Star Trek after all these years of being away. And, at first it was the joy of returning and saying, hurrah, Star Trek, I've missed you so much. And then seeing it with these new eyes, seeing it with this new perspective. And I started seeing echoes and points of conversation for a Christian perspective, for the gospel, just kind of all over Star Trek. And it started as a paper that I was going to present at a conference that actually was run by Dr. Noggle. And that paper is now in that book you mentioned earlier, Light Shining in a Dark Place, Discovering Theology Through Film, by my friend Jeff Sellers. And that sort of started everything. That was called The Undiscovered Country, Star Trek and the Christian's Human Journey. So that's where I got the title, The Undiscovered Country Project, from. And just started an ongoing journey through Star Trek from a Christian perspective, which is kind of part of a whole scope of things that I am doing and have done for a long time with media and the arts and pop culture.
Very interesting. It's Star Trek is, I think, a big part of a lot of people's lives, whether they know it or not. I mean, it's an iconic. Back in its day, when it started out, I know it was, a lot of people talked about. They laugh about, the humming planets and all the crazy space creatures and the crazy sets and stuff. But it really kind of I think not kind of, and I don't think it did get light. It got things rolling from a technology standpoint. It let people imagine. It was very well done, and it's something that so many people enjoyed and loved and embraced, and so much has come out of it. I mean, it's just spun out. It's gone so many different directions. Of course, then it kind of faded away, and then it came back, and now I think it's back stronger than ever. From a new perspective, though, which I don't think is all bad. Younger people today that didn't have an opportunity to watch it back then and kind of grow up with it are now getting a new look at it, and they seem to enjoy it because hopefully it will continue on with its same values. It'll make people go back and look at the old stuff again.
Right. And what's really interesting about that, you mentioned before I came on that K-Talk has been around for 50 years. Congratulations, by the way, to the station and everybody involved. But you guys, I guess, started the year before Star Trek, because Star Trek is celebrating its 50th anniversary next year, hence the release of the movie and hence the release of my book, The Gospel According to Star Trek, which is coming out next year. And it's amazing because as I talk about this, I know that to me and to people older than me, Star Trek is very relevant, something that we've had in our lives for a lot of years. But it's been amazing to me that some of the most ardent fans I know of the original series, people who love Leonard Nimoy, people who hate the Abrams verse, just like are people who are like 16, 17, 18 years old. And I'm like, what? You're supposed to be into the Abrams stuff. You're supposed to at least be into Next Generation. And you love the original series. You're watching a 50-year-old television program, and it's your favorite series. So it just speaks to the media environment that we live in now. We're at an age where, in 1997, the first generation was born who was able to watch film footage of people who lived 100 years before they were born.
Right.
And so now we have this connectivity. Like even myself growing up, I grew up on my parents' music. I listened to Motown, and I listened to 50s and 60s music and everything. And then I also, as I got older, I grew up on my grandparents' music. I started listening to swing and big band and all that kind of stuff. I listened to Abbott and Costello, and it was like, and so now my son is watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which is turning 50 in a couple of years, and that's one of his favorite programs, which I grew up on.
Right.
So this sharing of media is like is this kind of cultural heritage that we have that is so much more accessible than it ever was before. So never underestimate who's interested in Star Trek.
Well, and Star Trek, I mean, I think what it did for us as humanity, I think it set. I mean, it did a lot of things. Gene Roddenberry was a pretty amazing person. Mm-hmm. I mean, he tackled stuff back in the day. I mean, he tramped into a lot of areas that a lot of other people wouldn't have done. I mean, I think he threw the dice, but I think he knew it was going to eventually work. Again, so many different subjects. He crossed into areas that a lot of other people would never cross into, and it really worked. And I think that is probably one of the biggest draws of Star Trek, at least for maybe a little older generation, is that a lot of lines were crossed. And you can't even say that because I don't know if lines is a good thing, but you know what I'm saying. You get the gist of it. Things just, the old way of doing things, he moved past all that and created something great. And then it just continued to build and build and build and build.
Yeah, it's been amazing. And it's been, and the kind of, you were talking earlier about the influence that Star Trek has had on technology, and that's something that a lot of people talk about. There's a whole television special called I think it's How William Shatner Saved the Universe or something like that. Yeah. About the technological influence of Star Trek. But I think the human influence and the cultural influence is equally, if not more so, important. I think we can look to the technological influence as sort of a. Well, I don't want to sideline it entirely. It's actually very, very important because technology is how we interact with one another. But it is sort of a marker of how we identify with Star Trek just as human beings, just as people. And, I talked to a man many years ago, and I blogged about this a while back, a few years ago. I talked to a man who had grown up in a Catholic school, and he saw, hoses being turned on people and dogs being put after people on television, Right. And he was asking his, the teachers, the nuns at his school, what's going on, and the nuns used some racially uncool language and Right. said those people just don't know their place. And then not long after that, he saw the Star Trek episode "Let That Be Your Last Battlefield," which is one of the great episodes of the original series, which to a lot of viewers a rather obvious way, but like everything in Star Trek, in a veiled way, in an allegorical way, dealt with racism and the sort of pointless spiral that is. And he saw it, and I said, "Well, did it change your point of view?" And he said, "Oh, immediately, absolutely. I got it right away, and it changed the way I looked at the world." And that's the best and the greatest thing that art can do in whatever form we find it.
Was that the episode where they had the black and white face?
Yeah, with Frank Gorshin.
Yes.
You got the guys who are white on the right,
Right.
who are chasing after the guys who are white on the left, and they're black on the other side.
Right.
I don't know if which was left and right. I mean, it's that's the thing. It's so confusing to tell the difference. Is it the guys who are white on the right who are after the guys who are white on the left, or is it the guys who are white on the left who are after the guys who are white on the right? We don't even see the difference. Nobody on the Enterprise sees the difference. It has to be pointed out to them, and the idea is, well, that's kind of the way it is when you look, when you look at human beings. We're all some shade of,
sure,
pale to dark,
Sure.
Well, why is it you don't like those guys? You look pretty much the same.
It was interesting too because I had Frank Gorshin's son on my program.
Oh, great!
Just a few months ago, and we actually Frank was just an amazing actor. I think a lot of people didn't realize how amazing Frank Gorshin was.
Right.
And talking with his son, it was the quickest hour, and we actually talked about that episode. And his dad, again, an amazing actor that could do anything, and he would talk about how his dad would practice lines in their house, and it was just interesting to get it from his perspective, all the things that his father did. But it was curious that we did talk quite a bit about that episode of Star Trek. And Frank never really got into the Star Trek convention thing, and yet again, an episode that was so hard-hitting.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's just one of the ways that, for me, that episode is such a great episode in terms of what it represents culturally. But since I have that story from the man that I met who told me about it, his personal experience, I saw that I was kind of taken aback myself as a Christian to hear his story and to hear him talking about nuns at his school, talking about how these people just don't know their place. And I'm like, this is unreal. How can a Christian stand and watch injustice happening in their culture and say not only that's okay, but voice support for it to a child?
Right.
It's unconscionable to me. And so it's interesting to see Star Trek, something that is admittedly outside the sphere of Christianity, I think being a curative for some of the things that have gone wrong in Christian religion culturally in its time. And that's one of the things that interests me.
Very interesting. You talk a lot about on your website, and of course in the notes you sent me, about Mr. Spock. Sadly, yes. Leonard Nimoy, of course, it was so sad to see him pass away.
Yes.
An amazing actor and an amazing character.
Yeah, he was. It was actually 2011 was the year I started doing the Undiscovered Country Project. I started the journey back in 2008, but in 2011 I really started going public with it, and that October was when Leonard announced his retirement from conventions, and I had just missed seeing him when he came to Dallas that summer, thinking he'll be around another time. I couldn't make it out. The logistics, whatever. And so that October happened, and I think that's where I decided to start doing something with the Undiscovered Country Project. I wanted to do a tribute to him and to Spock, and so I did an event that month called Spocktober. I thought, why hasn't anybody thought of this before? Spock, October, Spocktober. It works so well, and so we did a month-long tribute to Spock, and that's where the Spockology book came from, and it's been an ongoing tradition.
So tell us a little bit about the book. What is the book? What does it cover?
Spockology is a really cool thing. I'm super proud to have put this thing together. It started as collecting the essays that people, or the blog posts, the guest blog posts that people had done for the Spocktober event, back when the Undiscovered Country Project was a bit more blog-based than it is now. I got a lot of great guest blog posts that people did about Spock and about Leonard Nimoy, and some really beautiful stuff. And honestly, some of my favorite stuff that I've ever read on Spock and on Leonard Nimoy. And I just thought, well, it'd be cool to give these essays more life, to draw more attention to them. And then, the Amazon has made publishing has opened up the publishing world so much. And I thought, well, I think maybe that's something I can throw together. And I started working on it, and then when I was just about wrapping it up and ready to release it, Leonard died, and I was like, I thought, well, we've got to do something else, and so I got some more contributions. I'd already put some stuff in here of my own that I hadn't published yet, and I got some more contributions from people, and some more sort of tributes to Leonard, and it's a really great collection. It's, my stuff is from a Christian perspective, and there's certainly some of that in here, both from myself and from other writers. But it comes from a variety of perspectives, nerdy, philosophical, theological, and personal. And we've even got a rabbi in here, Jonathan Gershom, talking about Spock and Jews in the 1960s, and people talking about there's a young lady who tells her story of meeting Leonard Nimoy on the day of his last convention.
Wow!
And the personal impact that he had in her life. She wrote a new piece for us for this book called "How Leonard Nimoy Saved My Life."
Wow!
And great stuff in here. And on the Spocktober event, we do giveaway, and we partner with a guy called Steve Neal, who's a special effects and makeup artist, visual effects and makeup artist, and has been in Hollywood for lots and lots of years. And he worked on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. He worked on Star Trek VI and Next Generation. He worked on Ghostbusters. He did a lot of stuff. Every time I talk to him, he tells me more stuff that he's done. I'm like, gosh, I didn't even, you don't even have it on your website, man. But he's just an amazing artist, and to him, the highlight of his career was in working on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, when Fred B. Phillips, the makeup artist from the original series, brought him down to Paramount and asked him to take the ears that Fred had made for Leonard to wear in Star Trek and make new ears for Leonard Nimoy to wear in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And Steve has his original molds that he made, that he sculpted, and he makes new ears off of those molds. And every year he has contributed ears for us to give away in the Spocktober event. And in the book, we have him telling his story of getting to make Leonard Nimoy's ears and meeting Leonard Nimoy back at the makeup room for Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So that's the kind of cool stuff that is in the book, and it's a really great collection.
Yeah, I had the privilege. There is an effort out right now. The three guys that actually built the model of the Enterprise for the motion picture, Paul Olson, Jim Dow, and Richard Taylor, have the Enterprise project going on.
Right.
And I lucked out to have all three of them on the program for 2 hours, and the stories that they told. I'm sure you've heard of, Larry Nemesek is big in the Star Trek world. Tried to get Larry on the show that night, but I couldn't. But again, the camaraderie and the stories these guys told, and how they just, it wasn't building a prop. It was building a piece of history, and to be a part of the whole project was just something that changed all their lives and built lifelong friendships with. Just an amazing thing that happened.
And that happened. There are a lot of stories like that in Star Trek. The connection between some of the cast members and the crew members and everything, and people who've worked on it together, is so great. And for people, especially for people like Steve, who were in that generation of artists who grew up on the original series, and now, here in the 1970s or the 80s or what have you, were getting to work on Star Trek after they had spent so many years loving and being inspired by Star Trek. It's a really, really special thing for them. And we did a Google Hangout session, which if you go to kevincneece.com, go to the media page, you can link to the archive of it on YouTube. We did a Google Hangout session at the end of Spocktober this year called Spocktoberfest. And Steve was on as our special guest, and we also had contributors from the Spockology book on there. We had a great, hour-and-a-half conversation about Leonard Nimoy and Spock and Star Trek, and Steve just brings out some of the best stories. And there are so many of these guys who have these amazing stories to tell, and it's a wonderful privilege that folks like you and I get to have to sit down and talk to those people
it is.
and hear them and share them with other folks. It's great.
It is. I got an email just sent in. We have a group of engineering students that listens to us faithfully every week up at the University of Utah. And they sent in a long, this is a long email. I'm going to try to condense it. Cindy writes in, she says, I'd like to know Kevin's opinion. Did he believe that the Kirk, the William Shatner, the McCoy, the DeForest Kelley, and the Spock, the Leonard Nimoy character, do you believe, does Kevin believe, or through the films or through the programs, that they had religious beliefs? Of course, Shatner. She goes on to say about how Shatner talks about God in the fifth
Final
movie,
Frontier.
Final Frontier, and of course, Leonard, Bones is always talking about my God, and kind of the old country doctor, and then Spock kind of neutral. What's Kevin's thoughts on that?
That's really interesting. I think in terms of the religious beliefs of the Star Trek characters, that was never something that was gone into in great detail, particularly in the original series. Now, when you get in later, other characters, other series, that's a whole other ballgame. But Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, there's an interesting episode, when you talk about Kirk, there's an interesting episode called Balance of Terror. And it's really famous for being Mark Leonard's first appearance. Of course, Mark Leonard played Sarek, who's Spock's father. And one of the other great Vulcan actor next to Leonard Nimoy, and then I would argue later Tim Russ. But that's a great, the introduction of the Romulans, and it's this great, submarine thing between the two captains. But at the beginning of the story, they have this wedding ceremony that's taking place in the chapel of the Starship Enterprise. It's the only time we ever see this chapel in all of Star Trek. And it gets interrupted, and then the story goes on. And when the end of the story comes back, he's standing with, I don't want to ruin the episode, well, it's 50 years old, but he's standing with the bride at in the chapel again. And they're trying to both deal with what has happened in this episode. And she is clearly turning to prayer, turning to God, and Kirk is clearly not. And so I felt like that was there's an interesting interchange between them and how Kirk responds to her and her faith. There's a line at the beginning during the wedding ceremony. Kirk talks about our many faiths, our many beliefs, that we share, and there are several references to that throughout the original series. But I think, so it seems to me from that episode, I mean, it's one of the few little glimpses we get in. Kirk mentions Eden and some other things throughout. And then, of course, there's Bread and Circuses, where everybody on the Enterprise bridge extols the virtues of Christian values. Specifically talking about Jesus for the only time that I can think of in Star Trek. And there seems to be a sort of some sort of cultural Christian background that everybody talks about or shares to a certain degree. But I think Gene's idea, really his ideal idea, which is not always reflected on the television screen, his ideal idea was that religion had kind of fallen out of favor by that point in human history. So how much really any of them would have had a particular religion is kind of up for grabs, up for question. But certainly it seems like McCoy... My theory is that McCoy was a Southern Baptist,
right?
Or maybe maybe some other form of Protestant, and then and I would say probably the same about Uhura, and then I kind of picture Scotty as a Catholic,
right? Right.
But that's just based on stereotypes more than anything else. And when it comes to Spock, it's really interesting. There was a book. I mean, this is not canon at all, but there was a novel released in the 1980s called Spock's World, in which Spock talks about the Vulcan race not only believing in God, but knowing that God exists as an actual fact, and what that means for their existence. And that was fascinating. I don't know how well that. I mean, the Vulcans are always a very spiritual race, Their devotion to logic is religious in nature, but there's nothing really said in Star Trek. So it's kind of a mystery. It's kind of interesting, and that's one of the things that's interesting about Star Trek in general, is that you can wonder about those things. and nobody goes into a great deal of detail like Star Wars prequels did to try to explain these things that are mysterious and there and interesting. And you can have conversations about them. It's kind of cool. I hope that answered the question.
I think it did. And you know, I think that the approach that they took or have taken is probably a good thing, because I think that so many people, whether it comes to religion, race, whatever, if somebody can't, how can I put it? You don't want to. It's tough to either include or exclude somebody,
right?
And to keep it neutral and not cross some of those boundaries lets people, it lets people wonder a little bit, lets people think about things a little bit, but yet it doesn't cross boundaries, and it keeps it very neutral, and it keeps it equal. It keeps it equal for everybody across the board, if you know what I'm getting at.
Right. Yeah. Gene Roddenberry didn't have a lot of patience for religion in his life, but I think what you're getting at there is something very true about Star Trek, in that there wasn't a lot of effort gone to try to denigrate religion in general necessarily. There's certainly a lot of episodes that are seen as anti-religious, and some of them, one or two of them, might be considered broadly anti-religious. And some of the lines that are said, particularly in Next Generation, I'm thinking of Who Watches the Watchers, but there's actually a remarkable amount in the original series and on through Star Trek, and people notice it more in the later years in Deep Space Nine and Voyager. But there's a remarkable effort to show respect toward religion, while at the same time generally not living in that world. Right. And so I appreciate the fact that even though he didn't share a lot of the beliefs that people had, he didn't reject all of them, but he didn't share a lot of the beliefs that religious people had, and certainly was highly suspicious of religion, which I commend him for. He still saw value in it because it's part of his own background. And of course, he's not the only author of Star Trek. There's lots and lots of people. But I think it comes from the attitude toward religion that we see in Star Trek comes from Gene in a certain sense, because he came from a Southern Baptist family and rejected that religion, but he still saw the positive ways in which that religious upbringing formed him, and so he didn't. He didn't go out of his way to say damaging or denigrating things about that.
Gotcha.
And I think the popular myth is that the opposite is true. But I think if you really read Star Trek carefully, it's much more respectful of religion than people give it credit for. Respectful of everybody.
Everybody's opinions and beliefs. Got a caller. Right. You want to take a call?
Great.
All right. Caller, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio.
Hey, pal, how you doing? This is Harv.
Hey, Harv, how are you, my friend?
This is good. Not bad. It's good to hear your voice. And what he's talking about on Star Trek this is truly the first time anyone ever took a look into the future. It was a thing of wonder, really. I'm thinking about how this works into the Akashic Records, and, peyote and some of the giants of industry, not industry so much as the thought processes of Tesla and Gene. Everybody else that was ahead of their time. I just think that I landed in a great place in time, and lucky me.
Yeah. Well, that you mean that somebody got something out of it to advance themselves or to discover things, or
yeah, all that.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, yeah. God Almighty, my old grandma, she was born in 1899, and she died in 1999. And
wow.
When I was around her house, I'd come around her and she'd say, "Yeah, I remember when we just rode horses, and then next thing I knew, I was riding in a car and had a television.
Right.
And I just, I watch a lot of stuff now. I got TV back for the educational channel, and so many things came in the last 80 years. It's almost incredibly.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. It is a great time to be alive, and it's incredible to speak to people like your grandmother. That's a wonderful story. To be able to speak to people like your grandmother who've seen those kinds of technological changes that in our life, we may take for granted, but that's not just something that makes life more convenient. That's a beautiful part of the human story because it's part of how we create and what we do with this world that we're given and with the tools that we're given and the minds that we're given to contribute to the lives of other humans. And
it's a wonderful thing. Hey, you remember when you were watching on black and white TV and we landed on the moon?
Right.
Gosh. I remember it like it was yesterday.
I remember, Harv, when we couldn't afford a color TV and we went over to Kretzky and bought this thing that looked like tissue paper and put it in front of the black and white TV.
Oh, my God.
And you thought you were watching color TV.
We used to go over to the Wade's house. They were the richest family on the block, and they had a color TV. It was a piece of trite, but it still seemed like it was upscale. And, and I get it. And here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are killing each other.
Oh, I know.
Sorry to bring a bummer down to this thing. Geez, we should, we have the technology to purify water from the ocean, and I don't care how much it costs, and food and everything. And some of these religions are somebody, I'm not sure who. It ain't good. So, gosh, I just thought, I just keep thinking about Kennedy saying this thing and the other thing, and next thing we knew, we were on the moon.
Right.
Yeah.
God,
and you're so right that you look at the technological advances and things, or you look at many other kinds of advances that we have that we can point to. I think that in the modern age, it's easiest to point to technological advances. But there's still something broken in the human heart, isn't there? There's still something that in us that isn't right, and that hasn't been fixed by technology, and that hasn't been fixed by anything else that we've turned to. And I think that's something that Star Trek talks about very much. That all the technology in the world is one thing, but it's how you use it that matters. I'm working on a book right now with the guy called Mark Boone, who's in the Spockology book, who's a philosophy professor. It's called Science Fiction and the Abolition of Man. We talk about the relationship between technology and virtue in science fiction. And that's one of the things that's really big in Star Trek, is that one of the things they run into is species who have advanced so much technologically, but they've lost their souls along the way, And Jesus said, what would it profit someone to gain the whole world but lose their own soul? And so we've got a lot of soul fixing to do.
What was your
Star
question,
Trek helps
Harv?
point us to that.
Do you think it's possible to advance them far and lose your soul?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I think we look at what happened over the last couple of days.
You get full yourself or something?
I'm sorry?
You get so full of yourself, you think you're like God? Godly?
No.
You have the right over a passage of someone who's dying and living because you have technology. I would think, I'm not trying to disagree with you, but I would throw this at you. I would think the higher your technology, the more you would get in touch with, even if you didn't believe in God, which I do. I don't know who or what that is.
Right.
But gosh, it's it's a big thing. So,
Right.
I mean, so I don't think I would. Well, I might. I don't know.
Well, thanks hey, Harv, it was great talking to you, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah,
All
I
right,
think,
fellas.
You
Hey,
be-
listen, it's always a pleasure listening to your show. Typically, I don't call in too much no more, but I listen all the time.
Well, you're always welcome. You know that.
great.
I'm always glad you're there.
All right, brother. Be good.
All right, fellas.
care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thanks.
Um,
That's great.
yeah, it is. No, I think too that some people, I think sometimes that. Hold on. Nope. Technology can't turn the phone.
Speaking of technology,
Yeah, speaking of technology, there we go.
awesome. There we go.
No, I kind of agree with Herb to some degree in that I think sometimes we master technology and we take it to a different point, and sometimes I think we forget about some of the important things in life and respect and faith. And I think there's a lot. I mean, sometimes the material things can sometimes override a lot of other stuff.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about the Undiscovered Country Project. I'm interested about this.
The Undiscovered Country Project is just kind of the name that I've given to all the stuff that I've been doing over the past several years to kind of have this conversation with people and get engaged on it. I've done a blog and I've done some of the writing that I'm doing. Of course, all of it has been working toward the Gospel according to Star Trek, and we've also done. Of course, this October event that I was talking about, that's part of the Undiscovered Country Project, and I've also done some audio commentaries. They're kind of on hiatus at the moment because I'm working on the book. But my buddy Tim Van Orden and I have sat down and gone through episodes of the original series and episodes of Next Generation and several of the films and done commentaries. Just taking this conversation, because Star Trek is so big. It's so huge. This book that I'm working on, I call it a comprehensive survey. I think that's that may be a contradiction in terms, but it's all you can do with Star Trek. If you're going to be comprehensive, you have to summarize. You have to be kind of glance over the surface, because there's so much in a single episode. Like we were doing earlier with Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. You can talk so much. So the Undiscovered Country Project is just sort of a way. There's a Facebook page and a Twitter account and things like that, and so there's a way that we can kind of gather people around the same project and the same ideas, and then it's allowed me to give voice to some of the people who are in the Spockology book as well. And it's just been my journey through Star Trek from a Christian worldview perspective, as I see things, as they come to me.
Do you do some of the? I was looking on your site. Do you do some events? Do you do some of the cons or any of those type of things?
I've been to some. I'll have more. I'm wanting to do more of that in 16, particularly when I'm promoting the book. But I've done some conventions and things.
So I think it'd be interesting. I mean, again, it's an interesting perspective, interesting topic, and again, it kind of opens up a lot of. It lets people talk about these things. It lets people talk about what they saw, what they experienced from, and maybe how it affected their life, because it does. Some of these things really affect people's lives.
Absolutely. We're talking about Star Trek. We're talking about, what it means to be human.
Right.
We're talking about so many things that come to the fundamental essentials. It's one of the things that science fiction particularly is good at telling stories about. Come to the fundamental essentials of who we are and why we're here and what we're about. And from my perspective, if the gospel is everything that we say it is, which is a way to discover the fullness of what it means to be human, then when we're doing something like Star Trek and talking about humanity very deeply, we ought to be bumping up against the gospel, and I think we very often are. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of Christians kind of either are kind of feel bad about being Star Trek fans, or they've just pushed Star Trek aside because it's humanistic. I mean, it's thoroughly humanistic. Mm-hmm. And they say, well, that's incompatible with Christianity. But from my perspective, it is Star Trek's very humanism that is what makes it relevant to the conversation. One of the reasons I call this the Undiscovered Country Project is that if there is an undiscovered country in contemporary humanity, I'm sorry, if there's an undiscovered country in contemporary Christianity, it's perhaps our own humanity.
Right.
And humanity is a good thing. It is fallen, it is broken, like we were talking about with the caller, but it can be and will be redeemed. And there's goodness and greatness in us and in what we create.
There is. And again, it's a shame to kind of see what's happening around the world, well, especially with this Paris deal. Again, how so few could damage, could do so much destruction to so many. It's unfathomable just to think about it. That some of the some of the evil that lurks out there. Mm-hmm. It's sad.
And the sad thing about, the thing that I think is so difficult for us is that it's the brokenness that's in the human heart that's in all of us, that we have the potential to do something like that, to be something like that.
Right.
There's a quote from Deep Space Nine. Damar is talking about the war that's going on in that series, and he says, the casual brutality of it, the waste of life. What kind of state tolerates the murder of innocent women and children? What kind of people give those orders? And I think that he's a character who's shaken. He's a part of the government, and he's shaken by what his government's doing to destroy life. And I think when we look at events like in Paris, we're shaken by what's going on in the humanity that we're a part of. That would, what is broken in somebody? What kind of heart decides to go and destroy people in that way? And it's a frightening thing.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to imagine. What do you think about now? I read some stuff, saw some stuff come through that there's going to be a new. Is it in 2017 a new series?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any insight on that yet?
I don't know much about it because everything that I've read about it has been very technical in terms of who's involved. Being produced by Alex Kurtzman, who was involved with the new movies, and it's going to be on CBS, and they're going to do online distribution as well as on television. And it's one of those things where people have been saying for years and years and years, we need Star Trek back on TV. We need Star Trek back on TV. That seems to always happen whenever Star Trek's not on TV, because that is really where it's best able to sort of flex its muscles and tell these kinds of stories that we've been discussing today.
Right.
And so, given that it's produced by Alex Kurtzman, is it going to be in the new universe? And if it's in the new universe, is it going to mirror the new films? And if it mirrors the new films, does that mean it's going to have a hard time coming around to what Star Trek is about? I think that's a lot of people's fear about it. But then it's also, hey, it's Star Trek and it's on television. Maybe that's the opportunity for some of what we've missed being tied to films for the last however long it's been, to come back. So it's one of those things where I know I will remain fully ambivalent about it until I actually see it. and when I do, we'll be doing stuff. I think we'll probably do another Google Hangout and stuff for the new film and for the new TV series and stuff like that, just to talk about it.
What do you think about the? What do you think about the new? We didn't even go there.
The Abrams-verse.
What the new Star Wars film I'm seeing? It's got to be getting a huge buildup. I mean, every day on TV you see 31 days, 20 whatever it is. Boy, they're investing some big money, and I understand a lot of theaters are already sold out.
Oh wow. Yeah, it's a huge deal. I'm kind of irritated that it's happening when it's happening, because I'm like, guys, it's Star Trek's 50th anniversary. Could you back off, please? Because we'd like the attention. Thank you very much. I've always been a fan of Star Wars and Star Trek, but I'm much more of a Trekkie at this point in my life. And I think the last three Star Wars films kind of killed my taste for all things Star Wars for a long time. But I am incredibly excited about this film. I'm really looking forward to it. I think Abrams is the right guy. there's Star Wars all over his work in Star Trek,
Mm-hmm.
and some of that's good, some of it's not. But I think he's absolutely the right guy to be at the head of that project. He's kind of Spielberg and Lucas wrapped into one, and he's just going. He's living all of our childhood fantasies.
Oh, he is.
Those of us who wanted to be filmmakers, he's up there doing what we all wanted to do, and I think it's going to be great. But I'll be glad to just kind of say that was cool, Star Wars, yay! Back to Star Trek.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the new Star Trek film, that's next July, I believe?
Next year. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
It's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a little different flavor, different director. It seems everything I've read, if you can believe it, is kind of getting more back to the roots of the original series, I think.
Well, Simon Pegg is one of the writers. Pardon me. Simon Pegg is one of the writers, and he's a certified Trekkie.
Right.
Even more so, I think Bob Orsi was kind of the one that they looked to as the Trekkie on the previous films, and I'm not sure how well he did in that department. Sometimes good. For me, the Abramsverse, the first film is really on the whole fantastic, and the second film is maybe the worst one ever made. So again,
good special effects though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, visually it's beautiful. You know you're going to get that. But that doesn't mean the script's any good. And even Abrams just recently talked about the fundamental story flaws in Star Trek Into Darkness, which I think we did an audio commentary for the film, but I never released it because I felt bad because I basically just kind of picked on it the whole time and talked about how awful it was. But I guess that's one of the things we do, so I may put it out. So again, with the third film, like the television series, I'm going to be completely ambivalent about it until it happens, and judge it on its own merits when it gets here. But
well, it's going to be good. There's a lot of cool stuff on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin, we got to wrap it up. The hour went really quick, and
yeah,
I'm glad that we were able to hook up. And again, you give us some time tonight. Again, a couple websites, Kevin C. Neece, NEECE.com. Listeners need to go check it out.
Yeah. Kevin Neece is Neece.
N-E-E-C-E.
And double E-C-E.
Gotcha. And where can they get the books?
The book, Spockology, is available on Amazon right now in paperback and Kindle editions.
Okay.
And you can also, there's a store on my website. You can get everything that I've got published there, things that I've contributed to and what have you. The Gospel According to Star Trek will be out next year through Cascade Books, and it will also be on Amazon and available through my website as well.
And then the other website is undiscoveredcountryproject.com, and that's went through that. That's interesting, kind of an interesting look at things. So you got a lot going on.
Yeah, the Undiscovered Country Project website at this point is a bit of mostly a blog archive right now. I haven't really, I've kind of moved away from the blog format, and that's going to kind of be folded in to the kevincneece.com site here pretty soon. But there's a lot of stuff on there that you can see where I've been since 2011, kind of the journey that I've been on, and it's fun to go in the Wayback Machine.
Without a doubt. Well, Kevin, I want to thank you for being here, and glad we got this set up, and let's reconnect again down the road, maybe after the Star Wars film and the build up to the new film, and talk more about it. So much to talk about, so many different angles you can look at this thing.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
It's been an honor, my friend. Take care. God bless, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, sir. You too.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.